These meetings are via Zoom pursuant to state law. The public can find information on how to participate in Planning Commission meetings in our public notices. Directions on how to find the full meeting materials, applications, and staff reports on the city's website are also included in our public notices. I note that we do have 4 of the 6 commissioners present, so we do have a quorum. Brandon, do you have any staff announcements?
I do. Thank you, Chair Werner. A couple announcements related to actions that the Planning Commission has previously held. One had to do with the adoption of the SOU master plan that was scheduled to be heard by the Planning Commission or City Council last Tuesday, but was postponed until October 7th. Essentially, Southern Oregon University was looking for further clarification on the application of conditional use permits on SOU campus for projects within 50 feet of residentially zoned property that's privately held. So as you may recall from the Planning Commission's discussion and deliberation, the Planning Commission has recommended that that existing standard stay in place. The City Council, in adopting modifications to the conditional use permit standard for height, it was the applicant's or SOU's impression that that was removing the conditional use permit requirement. And so going back to the City Council on October 7th to open first reading to give them the opportunity as a council to discuss that matter and public to be invited to comment on that issue, will allow that project to move forward with clarity from council as to what their anticipation on the ordinance amendment was. The other item...
And you were clear enough about what we said?
Yeah, the findings from the commission were included in the packet, and that condition was included as part of the findings for council adoption, but council did not adopt the findings at that meeting on the 19th in order to open up first reading yet again. So I anticipate that'll be the primary point of discussion at that meeting because all the other aspects of the Southern Oregon University Master Plan were discussed. So the other item, Grand Terrace, 1511 Highway 99, that at the applicant's request was postponed from the August 19th meeting to be September 16th in order for them to get a recording of the boundary line adjustment, which was one of the conditions from the Planning Commission and has not yet been processed by Jackson County fully, although they've approved the boundary line adjustment. So those are my 2 announcements for council actions related to work that you guys have done.
Okay, thank you very much. And public forum. If you wish to speak on an issue that's not on the agenda, please fill out the speaker request form, which these pink sheets located at the back of the room, and the pink sheet will be brought up to me and you'll be recognized. We have 2 people who have signed up. I will warn you that they're listing Roca Street on here, and I want to warn you that it's not about you're not allowed to talk about the vacation on Fern Street. Okay, so Bruce Bergstrom.
And you'll just need to turn that microphone on. There's a button on it, that little bar needs to come up.
Is it on now?
Yep.
Okay. I've lived on Roca Street for about 50 years, okay? And Roca Street has a problem that the city refuses to address. And the problem is that Fern Street and Roca Street come down together, and the storm drain at the intersection of Fern Street and Roca Street does not work. And so the water that comes down those 2 curbs goes out across the street, and it becomes so slippery that it is impassable, okay? It is so slippery that the city's solution to it was to paint the curb yellow all the way up to Fern Street, Okay, so it is a yellow curb all the way up to Fern Street. Okay, when I was walking home the other day, I noticed there was a city truck parked in the Fern Street right-of-way, and it was awkwardly parked. It was 10, 15 feet into the right-of-way on Fern Street. And I went by it, and then I said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. So I went back, and I talked to the guy that was there, and he showed me the pipe. And there was a drain pipe that came out of that storm drain that went down Fern Street, and it dead-ended at about 20 feet down Fern Street, and it just dead-ended. And another guy that was part of the group walked all the way down to Roca Creek to see if there was another end of the pipe down there. And according to their map, they showed that the Kern Street was put in. Well, it never was put in. Okay, and so that explains why the thing was overflowing. Well, about 2 hours later, 2 or 3 hours later, I was coming back up Fern Street, and I noticed the truck was still there, and it had moved down Roca Street, down by the driveway of Roca Park. And I said, what are you doing? What's going on here? And he said, oh, there's a crushed drain pipe in here. Well, okay, the combination of the crushed drain pipe and the dead end of the Fern Street right-of-way is the reason that storm drain never drained. And so they repaired the drain pipe, but the curb is still yellow. I don't know anything that's done with the right-of-way that goes down Fern Street. I can't talk about the right-of-way that goes down Fern Street because that's against the law, according to you folks. Okay? So I'm here to tell you that there is a problem with a slippery road on Roca Street. And it is very, very slippery. And it is so slippery that people will stay home when it snows because they're afraid to drive down there, because if they drive down there, there will be a car that's wedged in against the curb, and they'll smash into that car. And what else did I have to say? Let's see. Oh, there are two things that need to be addressed. One is the placement of the grate on Roca Street. The grate itself is up Roca Street. It's up about 3 or 4 feet from Fern Street. So the water that's coming down Fern Street comes down Fern Street.
Please wrap up your comments.
Yes, it creates a dam, and it forces the water out across the street. So it doesn't matter whether that grate is working or not. The problem is still going to be the same. It's still going to put water out across the street, and it's going to be a slippery mess.
Thank you.
Can you tell him about this?
No. Allison Laughlin?
Thank you. My name's Alison Laughlin. I've lived on Roca Street for 40 years. And we're coming pretty much because we think we've had really dangerous winter conditions on Roca Street between Fern Street and the Science Building. And now we're understanding how that's all happened. And we want the commission to know that. We felt it was important. So as Bruce said, when it rains, the water comes roaring down Roca Street and roaring down Fern Street, and the two of them meet right at that spot, and it spreads out, and so it completely covers the Fern Street intersection, and then it goes down and it completely covers the intersection.
It's not just Fern Street, it's Elkader as well as Fern Street.
And it also goes down to the bottom and spreads out and becomes sheet ice. And, you know, when you come home on a winter day, there's always a tow truck sitting there, and they're waiting for you not to be able to make it up the hill because it happens consistently. People are crashing into the side. We've had people coming down who've gone right over the curb and hit the Science Building. And it's I mean, I can't get, basically, if it's cold, and there's a storm, I can't get out of my house. And, I was really concerned in this last one because I had COVID and I was worried. I don't think an ambulance could get up to me. So we know when that drain must have broken because Dr. Holt's son used to park his heavy equipment there. And I'm sure that's when that drain pipe that they have repaired got fixed. Both Bruce and I are really clear that that isn't when our problem started. We've had the problem way before then. And that pipe's not big enough to take that volume of water. So with global warming, we're going to have even bigger storms. And I want the city to maintain the stormwater easement down the Fern Street easement and to extend it, if possible, to Roker Creek, or at least not lose the ability to do that, because Roker Street has those dangerous flooding problems. The Roker Canyon development will also increase Roker Street traffic and increase this problem. So we just wanted to inform you about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Go for it.
As both of these public forum items are tangentially related to an item that's on the agenda, I just wanted the speakers to recognize that those comments as public forum are not part of the record, as the public hearing for public testimony was closed before the Planning Commission. But the City Council will be holding a public hearing on the Roca Street vacation, and at that point, such testimony can be provided in writing or in person before the City Council as they make their decision based on the Planning Commission's recommendations. I further wanted to note that the Planning Commission does not typically work with infrastructure improvements, and so those comments are probably best relayed to the Public Works Department, but I do know that given they were out there investigating the storm drainage lines, they have identified the failings that you've identified and are likely looking to make improvements to those areas in order to effectively take storm drainage off of Roca Street into the storm drain system.
Yes. For a short period.
You say that the city planning commission or the city infrastructure is going to look into the problem. That sounds to me like you're avoiding the question.
I'm letting you know that the Planning Commission has no jurisdictional authority over infrastructure for existing developments. So the Public Works Department is the department that deals with maintenance of city streets, public utilities. The Planning Commission deals with new development activities and policies. So
But the planning commission can take away the ability for the infrastructure people to put the drainage down.
the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council. Again, you're speaking to an item on the agenda, and that is outside of the public forum.
Yeah, your options are to go talk to Scott Fleury, the Public Works Director, and appraise him of this situation. And then your other option is to come back to the City Council when they have a public hearing on the vacation of Fern Street and make your comments as part of that public hearing. Sorry to give you the runaround.
We've done that already. And we're getting a runaround.
No, we're not getting them.
Yeah,
I did that, but I worry that this piece of information, maybe the public works people needed to hear it too. That's why I did it.
Thank you. Okay, let us move on to our type 2 public hearing. Tonight, we are continuing the public hearing process from our July 22nd, 2025 meeting on PA-A-2025-00363, which is a request for a right-of-way vacation for a portion of Fern Street just north of 648 Roca Street, extending eastward from Roca Street towards Leonard Street. On July 22nd, 2025, the public hearing was closed, and the public record was left open for written testimony through August 26th, 2025 at 4 p.m., excuse me, which is today at 4 p.m. I will now close the public record. We will move to deliberations and make a recommendation to the city council. The final decision will be made by the city council. The site, as I mentioned, was just north of 648 Roca Street. The applicant and property owner are City of Ashland Public Works Department. The comprehensive plan designation is Southern Oregon University. Zoning is SO. And the tax lot and map are public right-of-way. I will now ask commissioners if they have had any ex parte contact. Commissioner Herron?
No ex parte.
Commissioner Karen?
No ex parte.
Commissioner Phillips?
No ex parte.
And I have not had any ex parte either. I'm not aware of any challenges for bias, prejudgment, or personal interest. I will acknowledge the written testimony received since the July 22nd, 2025 public hearing. We received a letter from Amy Swan, Greg O'Neill, Elise Emder, and the Southern Oregon University General Counsel, Rob Patridge. We will now begin deliberations. The Planning Commission had asked for additional information on whether SOU was offering to donate the riparian area and severe slopes, and did the Park Department want that? And the second thing we were asking for is there knowledge about, is there a storm sewer in the ground just north of the proposed vacation? And if not, how do we get a public pedestrian access easement? So as you will see in the materials that we received tonight, the SOU has volunteered to donate the riparian edges of the creek and the slope to the east, and they've indicated that they are willing to deed the section of the property to the city, and if the city does not want it, then they will look for deeding the property to a mature, non-governmental and nonprofit group, so that, with their intent that it remain in open space and available to the public. And let's see, what else? So we have the issues of storm drainage, public access, and dedication in front of us. Any comments on those issues, or anybody want to make a motion? Russell?
Thanks, Chair Werner. I'll go ahead and make a motion here. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council approve the proposed vacation of the unimproved segment of Fern Street right-of-way located north of 648 Roca Street, consistent with staff's recommendations with the following conditions. Number one, that a public pedestrian access easement be retained to provide a connection between Roca Street and Madrone Street. And two, that a 10-foot public utility easement and all necessary easement for city utilities be provided to accommodate existing infrastructure. The record should further reflect SOU's commitment to provide permanent public access along Roca Creek through a property deed or easement, which may be coordinated separately with the city.
I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion? I do have a question. So are you suggesting then that the city accept the easement for the property that SOU wants to donate?
Just that we recommend to the City Council that they be open to it. Not necessarily that they,
Go for it.
Well, so there has to be an alternative to not accepting it, which I think SOU is suggesting, but it's a little squishy.
Yeah.
So do we need to create some alternatives that we're open to for that dedication as far as the nonprofits?
Sure. Yeah.
being, and the problem's going to be that they're not going to necessarily have finances to manage that piece. So, yeah, I think of Southern Oregon Land Conservancy, but I don't think they'll want it. It doesn't really fit their criteria. Maybe, yeah, so can we ask that the alternative, the solution of finding an alternative donatee, is it a donatee, be brought back to us, or some kind of approval of who gets it or something? I mean, because we don't know if the city's going to take it or not.
Sure. Or city council has final approval for the entity that it's deeded to.
It needs to be, and so we're just approving
Or-
that it be deeded and remain open space, and how that gets resolved is still
City
up in the air.
councils.
Yeah.
Not,
Yes.
not come back to planning commission. We don't.
Yeah, we don't
make
need to
this-
see it, no, I would agree.
And you're suggesting that, so you're not making a recommendation that the city be the, are you making a recommendation one way or the other about the city being the,
If the city will not accept the property and nor parks, city council would have the final say. It has to be donated to public use regardless. They have to find somebody that will take it. So I don't know how to word that exactly, but what we're trying to do is just make sure that that happens.
So the wording I had was that we retain public pedestrian access. So that could be through dedication, it could be through an easement, I mean, whatever
Right.
means.
Sounded,
but that's different than the dedicating the hillside and the riparian area as a chunk of property.
I think it needs to be dedicated. It's not an easement.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Let's take the motion off and the second off and go back to basic discussion.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, let's start again. So you are we saying then that,
So the riparian corridor and the land between Madrone and Roca must be put into permanent public use. And that's what we're agreeing to.
okay,
And how that happens, we're gonna shove onto council.
I think there's some concern from SAU that some of those processes could take a long time.
Yeah, well, I think what they're asking for is that the vacation of Fern Street not be hung up on that
on that part of it.
part,
Right,
which seems straightforward.
okay.
Okay, and so, and you were saying the riparian area on both sides of the creek, and then the
Per the
steep,
description,
the
in
steep
the steep
area
area,
to the east,
it's the pedestrian,
and that's different, I think that's different than a pedestrian
Okay.
access that's going from,
okay,
Roca
from
Street.
Madrone to Roca.
yeah,
Okay, so the steep area and the riparian corridor as described somewhere in here is a mandatory condition of approval, that it be in permanent public use. So that, then we're not telling them how to do that.
okay. And then you're adding to the motion that there be a pedestrian
There
access.
is, it's already in there. So yes, that's part of the agreements, is that the at least I thought it was, because I read it.
Yeah, for the staff, the staff's recommending.
Oh, yes, that needs to be into the approval.
Okay. So the motion then would be to recommend to City Council favorable approval of the vacation and to ask that the public pedestrian access be retained in some form to provide a connection between Roca Street and Madrone Street,
Yes.
and that
That
the riparian area on both sides of the creek and the steep area to the east be retained in public use,
in permanent public access.
permanent public access, and I was going to also, I was looking to Brandon for the public easement along Roca Street
Oh, right.
for utilities.
A 10-foot wide public utility and access easement along the frontage of Roca Street.
Okay, so those 4 things.
4 things.
Okay, Eric?
Yeah, so the portion that's on the steep side, we don't really need to address who it gets deeded to. We would just require a deed restriction that it has public access. And if they keep it, or they
Right.
send it over to the city, or they find some other nonprofit, that's not going to hold up the process. It's a recorded deed restriction that it has
It's permanent public use deed restriction.
on that
We don't care
portion of the
who
property.
ends up
Exactly.
getting
That allows them to do boundary line adjustments and all that stuff that they need to do with their, and sell these properties down below then.
Well, but if it does take a long time, and we need some kind of guarantee that somebody's going to push that process along. So that's a problem.
Well, I think
I think
holding a deed restriction that the public, that portion has public access, gets them, they can go forward with the process, even if they own the property. The deed restriction's placed, and they're going to try to offload it on someone else. Is that right?
And they can do that.
And they could do that, or they could keep it, or the city
Right,
could,
and they can do
you
that
know, it's,
independent
Yep, that's right.
of following the vacation.
yeah, I would, yeah.
Yeah,
But if we deed restrict it at the time that the vacation's done, then I think we've achieved what SOU wants, which is to move the ball forward.
And we've achieved what we want, which is to have all those various things, yeah.
yeah, I think so too.
And was the public works easement for utilities, so possibly it was for sewer tie-ins and water and all the other stuff?
The problem.
To fix a problem that might have been identified. So that they're asking for, the city's Public Works is asking for, in lieu of giving this Fern Street, the easement in there, they want one down Roca going
Right,
lengthways.
right.
Okay, and that makes sense, and
Yeah.
then they could tie their utilities in properly. Okay,
Right,
thank you.
okay, is that clear for staff to? Is that clear enough motion?
I'm sure we can review the record, but essentially what I heard was the initial motion was for the pedestrian easement from Roca to Madrone. And that would be, just for clarification, at the north edge of the property, running through SOU property, through their parking lot, up to Madrone Street. And that's for pedestrian access. Additionally, the 10-foot public utility easement for future storm drain installation down the frontage of Roca Street, and then a deed restriction for public use for the steep slope portion of the property to the east of the property, and the riparian area be provided for permanent public access.
Yeah.
I guess on that, you started the motion initially. Did it matter where the pedestrian easement is from Roca Street to Madrone, or they can kind of choose whichever, if they want to go through the parking lot, or they define a development where it makes more sense to go on land, we leave it open.
Sorry
For a
for-
developer, it might be a little easier to manage that when it happens. We just are requiring these 2 points need to connect.
Correct.
Gotcha, thank you.
No, thank you anyway. So, do you want to make the motion, Russell, or do you want Carrie to make it?
Russell's so good at it.
I could give it
You
another
just say
shot here.
what Brandon said. I make
Yeah.
a motion that whatever Brandon said.
Yeah,
it
I'd like
goes.
to make a motion consistent with Brandon's statement, with the exception of the specific location of the pedestrian easement between
Madrone and
Madrone and Roca.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Michael, could you give us a roll call?
Commissioner Herron.
Aye.
Commissioner Kincairn.
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips.
Aye.
Chair Werner.
Aye. Thank you very much. The motion passes. And we will now move on to,
Chair Werner?
yeah,
Can I make a comment to the people in the audience that are here specifically for the Roca Street? It's anticipated that October 7th would be the date it'll go to the city council. This body did not make a final approval. They made a recommendation to the city council, so I'd urge you to prepare your comments to provide to the city council at that meeting.
The easement that you just approved.
Thank you, Brandon.
Two different easements?
Parallel is running, for the storm drain, is running parallel to Roca Street,
Correct.
where the easement goes down to
That's one easement. The Public Works Department is looking to abandon the connection from Roca to the creek and instead connect the storm drain to run parallel down Roca.
thank you very much. Okay, we have now a special event permit discussion with Deputy City Manager Jordan Brooklyn. Welcome. Good evening.
All right, good evening. Well, I am before you all in a slightly less exciting topic, but in my world, much more exciting topic, and that is special event permitting. One of the tasks that I am working on with the city is making it easier to host events here in Ashland. Commissioner Herron can speak directly to his experience so far, but I'll let you know about our current state. Right now, City of Ashland has 11 different short-term event permit types across 6 different departments. One event may require multiple permits, and I'm realizing I'm not even showing you the full show. There we go. For example, if you wanted to have a street party along Garfield Park, you would be required to get a short-term food truck permit via Title 18, a road closure permit via Title 13 in our code, and a noise permit and a park permit, which is a managerial process internally. That is 4 different permits you need to get across, 4 different departments with 2 to 3 different payment methods. So right now it's pretty much a headache to figure it all out. So my goal is to get all of our short-term event permitting into one section of code, to have it overseen by one department with one application that then all the departments can review together to make sure we have all of the necessary precautions in place, and then one permit issued to the permit holder. I am calling this my one ring to rule them all plan. But to get there does require code changes. Specifically, like most other jurisdictions, I am looking to create a new chapter under Title II Administration, specific to special event permitting. I am coming before you all because there are 2 short-term permits that exist within our Title 18 Land Use Code. And those 2 permits are going to be your 18.2.2.030H within allowed uses, which are the temporary uses, and then a very small reference to short-term permits in 18.2.3.145, which I know you all have memorized, so no need to read this slide. But these 2 short-term events that are in your land use code have to do with short-term events on private property and then short-term food truck events. I would like to move both of these events into the Title II Administration Code. So therefore, in the future would come before you all to request that change to Title 18. And then lastly, in that other section I referenced, there's just a reference to the short-term permits that we would need to change as well as part of that process. And so I am here before you all to get a temperature gauge to see if you are willing and interested in moving forward with those potential changes.
So which department would you see overseeing that?
City manager's office. And I will say we are piloting it right now between the Parks Department and myself, where we now are doing one application between our two departments. It's intaked through online, goes to me, and then once a month I meet with all the relevant departments for us to review all applications.
So that would be the same thing. You would be the hub, and you would have to review with all of their departments that are affected.
Correct. And so if we were to move, right now, I will say the planning department, they oversee all the short-term food truck permits, the short-term events on private properties. So what I would do is I would make sure that a planning member is within every one of those meetings to make sure we have planning perspective if we are doing the one application approach.
And so you would be responsible for scheduling those events as well. So
Correct.
Parks, what about like things like the Halloween run and stuff like that? Is that would end up coming through you, or would that stay with Parks?
Yeah, so what it does is it comes through me, though technically Parks has the online permitting system, so it technically comes through Parks. We all meet as a group once a month and we review every single application that has come in. We discuss and decide on what safety protocols need to be in place, if it's okay to permit this event. We then collectively say yes, and the Parks then goes forward with processing that permit, no matter the location in the city, whether it's Parks Department or on city right-of-way for First Friday.
Okay, so that's now. Or
We
that's
are
what-
testing that. I will say
Okay.
historically, before I got here, it was every department for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
So, you're talking about once a month. What if somebody needs a permit for tomorrow?
Yeah, we've done that before. We'll send an email out to the relevant departments asking for feedback. Though as part of our process improvements, we are working on helping event organizers plan ahead in advance. Because often the biggest struggle we come across is the traffic safety plan. If we are having a road closure, what are the parameters we need to put in place and help event organizers be able to meet those standards? So we are encouraging early submission of applications.
Okay, and do you have a backup process in case they don't take your invitation to apply early?
We do is we can't guarantee that we'll be able to permit their event. If they give it, I will do our best to try. But ultimately, if we can't guarantee the safety of the event or the continual access to public spaces, we will deny that permit.
Okay. Okay, Russell?
Thanks, Chair Werner. Thanks, Jordan, for the presentation. In neighborhoods, we think about livability, traffic, things like that. How will you be balancing the neighborhood livability with the desire to streamline events as part of this economic development?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to special events in neighborhoods, that's almost entirely going to be a block party. Block parties, you're required to be a resident on the block. You're required to have 75% sign off of your neighbors. And you are that's the only group that's allowed residential block party permits. When we're talking about the commercial zones, that is where it's a little different around the access to public space. They're intended not to upset neighborhood flow and access to their homes. And so that's more from the commercial A Street. We have a ton, parades down Main Street. Those fall under special events. And then a lot of events are happening in the parks.
Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah, of course.
So the block party process won't change?
It won't change. They will likely use the same permit form, but it'll still be just the quick review, the $18 fee,
Okay.
and that's all.
Another quick question. Will you be exempting any events in the new streamlined process?
Yes. So there are currently several exempted events. That is going to be 4th of July, the Festival of Lights, the Children's Halloween Parade, And I'm looking to Brandon and Derek to see if they remember any more.
There's 3 designated sidewalk sale days.
Correct. And then we have in the spring and the fall designated sidewalk sale around Memorial and Labor Day. Those I would recommend we continue to have exempted. Right now, I work very closely with the chamber. For example, the sidewalk sale, they've been trying to have bigger bashes. We do go through the special event process because they're actually hoping to close roads.
And then will you be changing the threshold for permitting for any of the events? Like, for example, sometimes there's thresholds for the size of structures or the amount of people or if there's music. Will any of those thresholds be changed?
I'm not planning on changing the thresholds. I'm mostly planning on changing the process. And how we deal with thresholds right now is it's on a case-by-case basis, where I'm getting input from police, I'm getting input from streets and from the fire marshal around what requirements are needed to have in place to maintain safety.
Got it. Thank you.
I'd appreciate the streamlining and the work that you guys are doing to get this done, and that everybody checks off on it when it, for the whole process. It seems like the right thing.
Thank you.
So what are you meaning by, would you like to approach these changes via joint session, or are you comfortable moving forward sooner?
Yes. So this is going to require a change in Title 18. It'll also require a change to other parts of the code that are not under the Planning Commission's purview. So we could do this through a joint session where you can overlook both sides of the code at the same time along with City Council. That will not occur probably until 2026 sometime. Or if you're comfortable, I can come back before going to City Council, show you the code changes, show you how to change Title 18, seek your recommendation, and then go to City Council, avoiding the joint session.
I'd like a joint session just because I'd like to work with council.
Totally.
But
And I will say, Chair Werner, you will likely have a joint session in the future no matter what. It'll be a question of, is this topic on that agenda?
okay. What do the rest of you think?
I'd rather encourage her to move forward with it without waiting to schedule a joint session, personally.
I would agree. I think that this kind of economic development process is something that council wants to see happen quickly, and if we can push our small part forward as quickly as possible, I think it would be beneficial to their goals.
Quicker the better.
Okay,
All right.
you've heard it.
I got my orders. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time tonight as well.
Thank you for coming before us. Okay, moving on to the 2025 legislative update. Derek, you have the honors.
I'll apologize in advance for how exciting this is. Okay, so this is a summary of legislation affecting land use regulations and the Oregon Land Use Program from the 2025 legislative session, based on materials put together by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association, the League of Oregon Cities, as well as Thousand Friends. We're not asking for any action from the commission, just wanting to inform you for informational purposes. There's a ton of information here. It's pretty dense. If there are questions, given that it's thousands of pages of material at the state level, I'll probably need to come back to you with answers. And Brandon and I do have a meeting with DLCD, a virtual meeting scheduled on September 8th to discuss changes, primarily housing changes, but most of these have to do with housing. So we'll have an opportunity following that probably to provide some more information. Just sort of to go through these, I'll try to go fairly quickly, but again, they're dense and there's a lot of them. So House Bill 2138 took effect on June 30th, dealing with middle housing and infill development. And essentially, even with the middle housing rules that happened a couple years ago, there's still local barriers being encountered, and this is trying to address them. A lot of these things speak to middle housing as it's envisioned in bigger cities. In Ashland, middle housing is really duplexes, but there's changes to definitions, density bonus possibilities, removing private exclusionary restrictions from CC&Rs, making it easier to cite manufactured housing types and ADUs, removing requirements for transportation impact analysis from any kind of middle housing development less than 12 units. There's also some allowances or requirements for cities to allow single room occupancy, sort of boarding house type development, that would allow up to 3 times the number of single room occupancy units that are permitted under the base density of the lot. And cities are required to demonstrate compliance with code changes by January 1st of 2027. There's also some efforts to promote density by prohibiting restrictive covenants and restrictions to developing ADUs and middle housing and any other housing types that are regulated in the jurisdiction below the maximum density of the zone that was in place before January of 2020. There's requirements that we make our tree removal requirements clear and objective that we'll have to look at. I think we're probably okay. And then the expedited middle housing land division process is changing, and the key change there is it appears to be removing noticing requirements and public comment requirements and limiting appeals to just the applicant. So it's making the middle housing division much more of an outright allowance, and middle housing divisions are the process for splitting a property that's got a duplex on it into 2, even though it's typically single family zoned, it's splitting it into 2 lots and letting each of the duplex units sell separately. So that's a fairly recent process, and they're changing it substantially. There's also rulemaking happening at Land Conservation and Development Commission by January 1st of 2028 that gets into a number of these issues. So we'll be seeing further rules coming down from the state speaking to these things, as well as speaking to model system development charge policies for residential development that they provide to cities as a safe harbor option that cities could follow to comply with state law. In terms of the residential development application approval processes, Senate Bill 974, which takes effect September 26th, imposes timelines on engineering plan review. So once you all have issued an approval and a subdivision is moving forward, they submit engineered plans to the Public Works Department, and this imposes a timeline for that review that's similar to our 120-day rule for land use. So there's a specified time for completeness review and a time for the city, 120 days, to issue a final decision. There are new classifications of development for urban housing applications, which get to a lot of the type of residential developments we see. Looking at those becoming essentially that the first decision must be done without a public hearing. We're going to have to look into that some more, but it suggests that subdivisions would have to become an administrative decision. And also it gets into the LUBA appeal process from there, and cities do have to conform with that by July of next year. So that will be something we see with significantly more discussion happening as we get into those details with the state. The third piece of that legislation gets into design standards, and it prohibits local governments from applying design standards to residential developments with 20 or more units, except for multifamily. And that doesn't include height, setback, or regulations pertaining to health, environment, or safety. And then that piece sunsets in 2033. I don't think this actually affects us because we don't have residential site review. We're not applying design standards beyond setbacks and heights. So I think that is not a big one for us. I think the urban housing application issue is going to be the bigger piece for us. House Bill 3560 gets into child care facility siting and speaks specifically to child care centers. which the state describes as childcare facilities that are primarily focused in commercial and industrial areas. The changes here are that cities now have to outright allow those, not just in commercial and industrial, but also in residential zones with a zoning that allows density over 12 units per acre, which would be our R2 or R3. So that means that childcare centers, including preschool recorded programs and school age recorded programs or parent cooperatives would have to become an outright permitted use in R2 and R3, where currently they are conditional uses. And cities are required to adopt new land use laws by January 2027 to reflect those changes. Senate Bill 83 gets to the state wildfire map repeal. I don't know if you've all followed the controversy over the state wildfire maps. Probably the biggest thing that was potentially concerning to the city was with that map repeal, there was discussion about getting rid of the ability for cities to adopt the R327 building code that gets to hardening of structures for wildfire resistance and defensible space. This bill actually retains that as an option for local governments, and we've already adopted it, so it really doesn't affect us. The other piece is that the state fire marshal will be preparing a model code for wildfire risk reduction that cities have the option to adopt. Senate Bill 179 gets to recreational immunity, which is sort of part of the discussion on the Roca Street property. And essentially, there had been some case law that had challenged whether recreational immunity applied in some circumstances. This is intended to remedy that and give cities the option to opt in. We've already done that. So I believe this kind of takes care of the recreational immunity issue for now. House Bill 2258 gets to pre-approved residential site criteria. Much like our ARU pre-approved plans, the state is looking at issuing a number of different pre-approved building plans that cities would then be obligated to approve without standard building permit review. And the state is going to adopt their rules for that by January of 2027. But again, similar to what we've already done with accessory units. Senate Bill 10, technical changes to moderate income housing pre-development loans program. That pre-development loan program was part of House Bill 2001 and 2023, and this just moves it around in the state structure. So I don't think there's anything of concern there. Senate Bill 48 is technical fixes to Senate Bill 1537, which gets to exemptions from land use separate from our variance process. And this just changes a lot of technical aspects that I'm not going to go into. Senate Bill 75 about wildfire hardening requirements corrects some errors in the ORS in clarifying where those apply. And the primary issue is not applying them to accessory dwelling units or land zoned for rural residential in counties, or also for replacement dwellings on those farm and forest lands. Senate Bill 85 gets to wildfire risk reporting, requires that Department of Consumer and Business Services and the Fire Marshal submit a report on wildfire programs to the legislature, Wildfire Programs Advisory Council, and State Wildfire Program Director. There's some technical fixes to the housing legislation program in 967 that gets to cities having the ability to allocate authority over local improvements through an intergovernmental agreement within an urban growth boundary, which I think would be similar to what we've seen with the Kendrick application at Grand Terrace, where there's a pre-existing agreement that the Rogue Valley Sewer provides sewer services there, even though it's in the city's sewer district. So we just expand that ability through intergovernmental agreements. Fees for LUBA are increasing under Senate Bill 817. There's some requirements for cities in citing psychiatric and behavioral health care facilities that are now requiring those to be outright permitted uses under specific criteria on certain lands. and also exempting some of those decisions from LUBA's authority. Their House Bill 2256 speaks to private rights for action on conservation purchased lots, which gets to whether lots are illegally established or not when they're sold. It shouldn't affect the city. House Bill 2316 looks at state-owned lands as potential for affordable housing. So if the state agencies are required to analyze the lands they have to see if they're appropriate for use to develop affordable housing, for instance, surplus parking lots or things like that, that could then be transferred to government or housing authorities in order to build affordable housing. There's some technical fixes happening to housing legislation under House Bill 2347. I don't think any of these are earth-shattering, but to be aware of. House Bill 2658 speaks to frontage improvements for building alterations, specifically if someone's making alterations to an existing building and the value of those alterations is less than $150,000. They're not expanding the footprint or changing the occupancy. Cities can't require street frontage improvements with those type of permits. Housing infrastructure financing program. They've established a state level structure to provide loans and grants to build infrastructure to support residential development, with a formula to ensure that those grants and loans are split between small and large cities. The candidate projects have to meet specific minimum densities, and they have to, or affordable housing projects will get grants instead of loans. This initially came through the legislature with $100 million in funding, and through the process was cut down into $10 million, and it's from lottery bond proceeds. There's new allowances to allow amending regulations regarding participation on planning commissions to specify that only when a commission has 5 or fewer members is there a two-person limit on the number of participating persons that can be involved in selling or developing real estate. There's also provision, new House Bill 3144, effective in January, that essentially nullifies CC&Rs if they restrict manufactured housing. There's some funding provisions in House Bill 3145 to support affordable manufactured housing development using LIFT funds, local innovation fast track money through the Oregon Housing and Community Services. They've prescribed up to $25 million to be used for developing affordable manufactured housing. There are prohibitions now on local government imposing new SDCs specific to residential sprinklers under House Bill 3505. Senate Bill 1099 requires local governments to allow preschools and pre-kindergarten education on land where places of worship are allowed. I think that was something that was already in place through case law under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, but now it's specified through Oregon law. Senate Bill 1129 gets to amending the process for identifying urban reserves for a city. Ashland currently doesn't have any urban reserves identified, but it would allow cities to give lower priority to lands that are already subdivided or have planned unit developments on them, or that would otherwise be cost prohibitive to develop. So essentially allows cities to give a lower priority to lands that, if they already are developed or are going to be difficult to develop, have less likelihood of providing the additional housing cities are looking for. And we're close to the end, or we are at the end. So again, if you guys have any questions on any of those, but we're going to be following up with the state and may have further updates for you. And you'll definitely be seeing some code stuff come back to you based on these.
I have a question on, I think it's 2005, HB 2005,
Yeah.
citing of psychiatric and behavioral health care facilities. I was wondering how that might apply to a permit that we had before us. Yeah, several months ago, that, where the people wanted to have a peer site review.
Weekly, like with a week maximum stay.
Yeah,
Respite center? Is
respite
that-
center.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll need to look into how that applies to the definitions of residential treatment facility. My recollection is the peer respite centers weren't under that same definition under state law. And the problem was that when they adopted the program for peer respite centers, they had indicated they were going to do rulemaking to specify how cities were to deal with it, and then never did that rulemaking. I don't believe this addresses it.
Yeah, I recall one of the primary distinctions was that a residential treatment facility, the occupants of that used it during the time that they were there as their residence, whereas the respite center specified under the state law that they could not stay for periods of longer than 14 days.
Yeah.
But again, I think Derek's right.
Real quick on that. On that first sentence, if there's not a comma in there, it makes a huge difference. So it says zone for residential commercial. Is that a mixed use? Or is
I think it
there
should be a comma
residential
there. I think
and
that was-
commercial, so
Yeah, I think there should be a
should
comma.
be a
there.
comma for both, so, okay.
Yeah, the language appears similar, and we'd have to look at the bill itself, to the language that was adopted by the state for emergency shelters, where it was stipulated essentially in any zone, they're outright permitted unless they have natural resource or hazard lands that would be impacted by the development of the shelter. It seems similar in that way.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? No?
I do have one. Yeah, this one and the one that was the daycare one, allowing that in residential zones. Those would still be a change of use, correct? So they would go, building would get to take a look at codes and fire codes and easement or access, handicap access, all the stuff, right?
I believe.
Commercial
well,
kitchen.
Most definitely. Any building that's being occupied by 17 children and staff would have to meet building code to accommodate ingress, egress, and protections. I think that this summary is relating to changes in land use zoning that would not allow cities to prohibit childcare facilities within multifamily residential areas. I think the city of Ashland, in implementing these standards, and again, before January of 2027, but we could also look at the viability of allowing them within single-family residential areas as a discussion point, addressing childcare needs.
So it's conditional use now in residential zones to have childcare facilities.
Correct.
So all this does really is make it not a conditional use.
Yeah, and I think it would make it outright permitted, so there wouldn't be a land use action at all.
Okay, so it'd just be building permit.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our next item is Planning Commission Annual Retreat Discussion. So Brandon is suggesting that maybe we work on dates to have a retreat and decide whether it's a Friday or a Saturday. And Friday might be more conducive to having legal staff and maybe fire department staff be able to join us.
Yeah, another alternative might be a weekday. That typically you have a Tuesday study session. Your Tuesday study session in October is not yet booked out. So in lieu of a study session, we could meet early in the day and have a longer retreat period into the evening as opposed to, like we've done as retreats in the past, but
Okay.
So that would be October
23rd, I think.
23rd.
I'm sorry, the 21st.
28.
No, 28th. I'm confusing council dates. Apologize. Yeah.
28th, yeah.
I mean, it's an option to consider, but if you guys do want to get together on a Friday or a Saturday, we can accommodate that as well.
That Friday won't work, 31st.
Yeah, we can meet far earlier than that. If, we could theoretically meet as early as September 9th, because as I understand it, we only have one set of findings to address and no other current action items on that date. But again, that's pretty short order to prepare.
So what do you want to do on the retreat?
That's what I was just
Oh,
about to
okay,
ask. Like,
okay.
what's,
Yeah, some items that came up at the last Planning Commission meeting and direction that we received as staff was to reach out to the legal department about doing a public meeting law. And I've spoken with our city attorney, and he's amenable to coming to the retreat in order to give a general overview of public meeting law. I've also reached out to Mark Shea, the fire marshal, and Chris Chambers to talk about wildfire safety issues. It's timely in that the city council just approved the community wildfire protection plan, which has in it some action items to make land use changes that would address really subdivision, maintenance of open space, those kind of things. That seems more of a regular study session item in my mind. But the question about wildfire preparedness standards, some of that information, and what the fire marshal does in terms of reviewing current planning actions is something that, again, both Mark Shea and Chris Chambers said that once a date is determined, they'd be able to come to that, hopefully, if they don't have a conflict, in order to provide information to the commission as to how they review current planning actions.
so
Which I
we're not
think-
talking about doing a tour or anything?
We can,
No, but
yeah.
it's a question.
I'd like to see the condos, the apartments at Iowa and Garfield. They're new,
Oh, yeah, those?
yeah. Anything else, anybody else would like to see?
Other things that we've had in the last year or so would be Goodwill, those apartments in Garfield in Iowa. There's a development that you all didn't see that was approved at staff level on 285 Whiteman. That's a straw bale house.
Yeah,
by some
yeah.
architects out of Berkeley that are pretty well known nationally. And it's very nicely done, very nicely landscaped, with kind of a permaculture bent. And they've indicated if we can work out a date that works for them, they would be willing.
Yeah, I would like to see that too. So we could do both?
Yeah, the Tuesday works best for me.
Okay.
Or you're going to have two junior tennis players in here complaining that their dad can't take them to a tennis tournament on a Friday.
Heaven forbid, we don't want that. Tuesday work for you?
Yeah, Tuesday, yep.
Sure, okay. Well, let's assume it works for the three members who aren't here, and, and go for Tuesday. And that's the 28th of October. And I'll leave it up to staff to decide when we start.
Yeah, I think if we want to do tours, we could meet early and go over the public meeting law, fire stuff, break for lunch, and then go do a tour in the afternoon. So if we met as early as noon, then that would give us plenty of time to,
See both,
Yeah.
or do both things?
right,
Okay. So you're talking about like noon to 5, noon to,
yeah, or 11 to 4. We'll get back to the commission. We have 2 months to determine
organize
that.
that. Okay. Okay, that's all we have on the agenda. Anybody else have anything else they want to talk about? I would entertain a motion.
I just have a quick question.
Sure, go for it.
Do we have any applicants for the vacant seat on the planning commission?
We do. He's sitting in the audience right now. He's sort of midway through the process, and we'll see what happens.
Excellent. I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We are.